Hello there, and thanks for choosing this episode of Unfiltered. Since this content was originally released, some other information has come out in regards to the CrowdStrike outage. And I really wanted to share this with you because I think it's actually quite interesting. So in this addendum, I'll be talking about 2 points. First one being a video by a YouTube channel called Internet of Bugs. The video is called Development Techniques That Could Have Prevented It, i.e. the CrowdStrike outage. The video focuses more on how to develop and ship better code. So looking at things like better error handling, unit tests, phase rollouts, and things like that. The channel itself is a really great channel. I definitely recommend you checking it out and check out this particular video. And I'll drop a link in the description of this video to that as well, so you can actually go and have a look at that. Now, the second point in the addendum, which was probably the most important one that I wanted to mention to you, was a video from another YouTube channel called Windows Weekly. The video is called Scent of Carbon, and the episode is 891. Now, obviously, at the time when this happened, everyone really blamed Microsoft for the outage at the beginning. CrowdStrike were actually quite good at putting their hand up fairly quickly to actually say that it was their problem. But the Windows Weekly YouTube channel picked up on an article by Wall Street Journal around the same time as the outage. And according to Windows Weekly, the article mentions towards the end, quite casually, that it was the European Union which had actually forced Microsoft in 2009 to allow other security companies to have the same level of access to the Windows kernel as Microsoft does. So not many people apparently knew this. Certainly not many journalists picked up on it apparently as well. And through the investigation that Windows Weekly did, they actually found that it wasn't 2009 as had been originally written in the Wall Street Journal article, but actually it was 2006 when this happened, according to Windows Weekly. So this was around the same time when Microsoft was actually already under investigation and pressure on other perceived monopolistic practices around things like Internet Explorer and some of the other bundled software that Microsoft was providing with Windows. So really, Microsoft was kind of really constrained by the European Union in terms of being able to lock the Windows kernel fully due to concerns around sort of their monopoly position that were put out, or this was kind of the position that the EU Commission had. So this prevented Microsoft from at least being able to tighten the rules and conditions around third-party software vendors being able to operate, in the kernel space. And it seemed to be that due to such interference by the EU, this essentially prevented Microsoft from being able to restrict that access to the Windows kernel. Anyway, this is all new information, so I thought it was actually quite interesting to add this into this video. I'll drop, like I said, links to all this information in the description of this video. Please do go and check out both channels. It's great information. But with that being said, I hope you enjoy this particular episode of Unfiltered. CrowdStrike. What the boop happened?
Oh, well, for me as an analyst, it was interesting because, first you had to get into what physically happened. And that's intriguing. I probably learned more about the kernel and, Windows operating system than really.
More than we cared to know.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, it was like, oh, do I really, but there were some interesting technical things that came out of that. But the one that really struck me more than anything else was the implications for business, and the fact that business has probably never really viewed the end user device as a sort of mission critical tool. It's almost like your PC falls over. Well, okay, well, someone come along and fix it. It'll be another way to get on. Nobody ever, I don't think a lot of companies, and there are one or two notable exceptions, really thought, what happens if I lose my whole, PC estate or my whole end user estate? Doesn't matter how good my resiliency is and my recovery is of back-end systems, because that's where the focus tends to be. Actually, your end user device these days is a critical piece of your infrastructure. And I think an awful lot of people have missed that. So I think there's a sort of wake-up call for businesses. I mean, it was interesting to watch people trying to recover. And there were one or two notable exceptions of companies that seemed to recover pretty quickly. I mean, a couple of the American airlines, I think it was Delta and American, or it might have been Delta and United, seemed to get their systems back up quickly. And I'm not quite sure why. I mean, there's very little detail coming out about how we did. What a piece of detail I did get was around a large, well-known retailer. And I can say no more because I shall drop my my source in it if it gets. But they only implemented the CrowdStrike update for half their EPOS devices.
Right.
And they were going to see how that went. And so they lost half their EPOS devices, but the stores didn't close down because half of them were still working.
Right.
And so there was an element of some companies had understood they needed to mitigate the potential risks. Others seem to have been completely caught unawares by this. And I think it's back to everybody has sort of focused and almost sort of laser focus on what are critical systems, and they tend to be the applications and the back-end applications. And nobody's actually gone, what happens if we lose all our end user devices? ATM networks going down, EPOS devices going down, booking in systems at airports because they're all PC oriented going down, all those sort of issues. You think, my goodness me. And so this is back to the fact, I think, that by and large, businesses don't really get to grips with what are the critical systems I need to support and why. What are the ones that if it goes, I go out of business, and how quickly can I get it back? And I just think generally business right across the piece is quite poor at risk management and risk mitigation. And I think this has just highlighted that again in absolute spades.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we weren't obviously going through all the sort of technical details of it. There's plenty of sort of people out there. There's actually a couple of videos. A guy on YouTube has put out, he's an ex-Microsoft engineer, I believe, called Dave Plummer. So we'll try and provide some details on that. He actually goes through it fairly, in a sort of short amount of time, kind of explains the problem. But essentially, it's because the CrowdStrike agent, shall we say, is acts as a device driver. It operates in the kernel space, and because it's digitally signed by Microsoft, it's trusted. However, updates coming to it, which can also be in the form of code, were not necessarily part of that digitally signed agreement with Microsoft. And I think that's really what's caused the problems.
The irony is, or appears to be, that for those updates, which they call either channel updates or template updates, don't need to go through the sort of strict routine of checking for a proper software update, of the whole system. They use a debugger. And the irony is there was a bug in the debugger. I mean, it's the unknown unknowns, isn't it? I mean, it had the same, there've been two updates before that for the verified system, two updates that went through on the channel or the template updates without any problem at all, because the code to do that didn't have any bugs in it, or didn't have the bugs that the debugger didn't find, and it was one of those classic ones. I mean, but again, the argument there is, as much as anything else, is why do we need to actually get inside the kernel? I mean, there's a much wider question, which is probably not for today, is why on earth do we need to be playing around with inside the kernel? I'm sure there'll be arguments around performance and security and all those sort of issues. But the reality is if you start messing around inside a kernel, you're going to cause yourself problems downstream.
Yeah, I mean, it acts as a device driver, so I can appreciate that kind of needs to be there as soon as the OS is starting, the kernel is starting. But I think there should be probably a kind of a two-way approach to, if you're running in user mode, then you get additionally signed. But if you're running in kernel mode, maybe you get digitally signed or something. It's kind of a little bit more scrutiny on those types of, on that type of code that's running in the kernel mode.
Yeah, I think I think there's got to be a sort of understanding that actually accessing kernel mode for anything other than the basic operating system is something you should keep to an absolute minimum.
Yeah.
And we go back to that. So, but no, I think fundamentally it just highlights how little understanding I think businesses have of the implications and risks that they face of not understanding how their technology is supporting their business and what happens when it goes down. Because if they'd known that, they would have had some other, and some did, and there'll be good ones. But obviously, very hard for us to get real sort of evidence as to who failed and who didn't fail. You want the much more honest debate around, oh blimey, we lost all our end user devices and it took us forever and we had to manually rebuild every one of them. Oh dear, what a disaster. And other companies going, well, no, I had various automations in place and mitigations that said we didn't lose them all. Unless you share those, other businesses are just going to go, oh, they'll point the finger at CrowdStrike or at Microsoft and go, you so-and-sos
well,
and carry on as normal, which I think is criminal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think because people were seeing the Windows OS sort of failing, then everybody was pointing the finger at Microsoft initially, and there was a lot of conflation, sort of in the press as well, because we couldn't tell what the percentage split was between client machines and server machines, and because and end users can only see their own machines and their own POS systems, as you said, and booking terminals, whatever they are, they would assume that it's only affecting the client machines, whereas actually we don't know whether something similar was applied to server machines in the data center. But because those are not visible, we don't know what this percentage split was.
And obviously the numbers are very different too. So your server goes down, and okay, you have to reboot it manually and in safe mode if you can do that with the server. I'm not that way inclined, but if you can do that manually, then you're talking about tens of servers or maybe hundreds at most. You're talking about thousands for each individual organization of these end user devices. So it's I think you just need to think, hold on a minute, this isn't about the application at the back end, this is about actually losing all access to them through your terminals.
And again, I don't know. I mean, I assume that the majority of servers running Windows Server would be virtual machines these days, even in the data center or whatever. So that's fine. But again, we don't know, like I said, how many of them were affected, what the percentage split was between server machines, Windows Server and Windows 10 or Windows 11. There's
a lot of learnings that need to come out of that. But as I say, I'm much more focused on getting business leaders and senior business people to really sit down with IT and say, let's work out what are the things that are going to kill us if it stops, and how do we mitigate that? And I just think there's and we've been arguing this for God, as long as IT's been around, that better understanding and better cooperation between business leaders, and IT leaders. Business leaders go, well, it's your problem, you go away and deal with it. And that's unfair on IT, and yet IT struggled to communicate in the sort of terms that business leaders have. That's nothing new, but my God, this had an impact this time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. And also I think the problem is that, there was obviously a lot of misinformation in the press, but I was looking at it from a technical point of view, and I was thinking, okay, well, do these organizations not have recovery processes for using things like WinPE or the Preinstall Environment, which you can use through PXE Boot and Wake-On-LAN and stuff like that. And then you just need to really pass through the BitLocker key, the encryption key, because obviously you need to decrypt the drive in order to address the problem. So I assume that most companies that were affected had something like that, or rigged something like that very quickly, to make it happen. One interesting point is that we now kind of have a good idea of who CrowdStrike's customers are. So the customer list got revealed in the press inadvertently because they were all screaming and their customers were screaming in turn.
Yeah, I mean, CrowdStrike's been so successful in the past 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's taken that particular part of the security market by storm. Because most people say it's a great product, but again, how do you mitigate the risk? Do you need multi vendor strategy? Some of it surprise. The other thing that you say conflated, I remember early days, and I thought you were probably going to blow a gasket, was they were pointing at it being a cloud problem. And you go,
yes, I was going to bring that up actually, because you and I spotted an article in CIO, I think magazine or something. By I think somebody called Guyana Swain.
Well, it was very much coming out of their Indian sort of region. It was strange, but it was sort of pointing the finger at cloud. You're thinking, really?
And the funny thing with the articles, and I will provide a link for this, by the way, because it is quite amusing. The stock picture in the article was of a person smiling in the data center.
I know.
And I thought, hang on, that's not.
So yeah,
the price is not a smiling, session.
As usual, everybody wants to react quickly and say, "Oh, it's this or it's that." There was an awful lot of finger pointing.
I found it, to be honest with you, a very irresponsible piece of journalism. Things like it said, and I'm quoting now: "Expose the fragility of cloud-dependent systems, where a single point of failure can have cascading effects." What cloud systems and what single point of failure?
Exactly. It was, as you say, it was
irresponsible. It got to do with the cloud.
It was uninformed. It was irresponsible. Didn't help with the overall argument. As you say, I think obviously CrowdStrike themselves will be looking at their own process and procedures. Microsoft will have to think about how they give access to the kernel and how do they, as you say, validate what's going through. Do they have to do it for and you get this sort of trade-off between speed and security. A lot of these template updates are to match new security threats. Therefore, they've got to do them fairly quickly. And therefore, the Microsoft validation process for anything accessing the kernel for a proper update takes quite some time. So again, all these challenges. Business just needs to be aware of those challenges and the extra risks that they bring and say, how do I mitigate that? Not, I don't, well, I'm going to say it wasn't the case that they weren't very good at risk management. I just don't think many organizations had even really considered how mission critical their PCs were.
Yeah. And I mean, in fact, if, in order to kind of, or if organizations have done it differently, mitigating it through things like cloud VDI, for example, would have actually, helped in that process. If they actually put, their end user systems or the client machines into a VDI environment running in the cloud, that should have been easier for them to, to restore from that, to recover back to a decent image. But I just found some of the, some of the information out there quite, well, it was utter garbage, to be honest with you. I mean, I just found it really, I was quite furious, I think, about a couple of the articles, and the claims were, not only ludicrous but a complete jump to conclusions as well. And we were right smack in the middle of it at that point, as
you say, they were. But again, it's all part of the same cycle that we get into, isn't it? That react quickly and consider the implications later. It's just. In a number of spheres, but it was disappointing, I must admit, the whole thing, which is why I wanted to get away from the technical side. So that blog I wrote was really aimed at business people to say, just wake up, guys,
Yeah.
and start collaborating at the right level with your IT departments.
Yeah, and we'll come to your block for a minute. I just wanted to point something else out. Somebody on LinkedIn put out the usual, well, if you were running Linux, this wouldn't have happened to you. So I gave him a piece of my mind.
I saw that, yeah.
And I said, yes, because of course, 2024 is the year of Linux on the desktop, isn't it? So,
but also the fact,
and I got a few likes for that as well. So
yeah,
a few people
but also
enjoyed
the
that
fact
joke.
that Linux had suffered from
Exactly.
and so it just happened that this particular one hit Windows. The Linux one, as you say, not so many Linux desktops, so it doesn't make much difference.
Yeah.
Apple are the only ones who seem to be sort of getting away with it, but then they've got a real sort of walled garden approach, and it's quite difficult to, which has its benefits, but also has its drawbacks, So.
Yeah, I mean, it did. There was I think, article in the Register because the update, the CrowdStrike update for Linux a few months ago broke Red Hat, broke Debian, and broke Rocky Linux as well, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So there was an article on that, which I will provide a link for in the description. So yeah, I mean, it just really it didn't make any sense. Now, one thing I wanted to kind of explore was whether people, because and I think you mentioned this in your article, people talk a lot about DR, and kind of that sort of balance between sort of having a DR strategy and obviously not having one. But if you have one, it's a lot of money spent, and it's kind of, you blow your budget, and then maybe it will happen to you, where you will need to instigate the DR, and maybe you won't, you don't. It's just like a lot of money spent on that. So one thing I thought about was, why aren't some of those DR strategies taking advantage, a lot more advantage, of kind of cloud native technologies, things like serverless and infrastructure as code, for example, where you're not upfront, apart from the research, of course, and and the testing, you're not really investing in any type of quote unquote infrastructure, be it physical or virtual in the cloud, upfront. So it's not sitting there twiddling thumbs waiting for your production environment to fail so that your production can fail over, but it's kind of instigated at the point of failure when it's needed. So you stand up that serverless environment for your most critical, sort of line of business applications. That becomes your new production environment until you recover your standard production environment, which is maybe a little bit more of a settled environment. It's like your standard environment running in instances or containers or whatever. But if that was to fail, let's not try and recreate it all or have it sitting somewhere on standby, but actually through serverless be able to recreate it on the fly instantly. Yes, you'll lose maybe a few minutes or an hour or two of your services, but that's better than days worth of and weeks worth of of failure or downtime.
But I think you've just nailed it there to an extent, is the sense that it's then up to the business to say, how long can I survive without this?
Yeah.
How long before it does me serious damage? If you're in financial trading in the city and you're dealing shares and futures and God knows what, milliseconds can cost you, millions of pounds, millions of dollars. So there will be a different level of that. And the other thing I always suggest, and it shows my age, is that disaster recovery is quite separate from building resilient recoverable systems. Quite different. And people can, again, conflate the two.
Yeah.
Disaster recovery is, you've lost your whole data center, guys.
It's all gone.
It's gone. Your office, you've lost your office. Again, disaster recovery. If your office with all the PCs in is burnt down, where'd you go and how do you do that? It's a very, I mean, in the new world of working from home, maybe that's not so much of an issue as it used to be in the old days. But no, I think that the challenge is, how do I build resilient, recoverable systems, which is what mainframes were all about in the old days. Again, it was, what you could tell the ones that were good because they failed over to the last transaction, without even blinking
Yeah.
to somewhere else, but hey, yeah, let's not go down that
Yeah.
route.
Yeah.
But
So
but you were right. I
yeah.
mean, can you use serverless and can you use those sort
Yeah,
of
it's just a different way of doing your DRs. And I appreciate what you're saying about having a resilient architecture. And yes, with cloud and multi-cloud, and so on, you can do that. And things like chaos engineering being built in, and so on, and having more of the cloud native sort of techniques, for development, and also for goodness sake, even for the rollout of updates, like A/B testing or canary testing, stuff like that. That's the whole point. That's why we have those things. I can't believe that people still haven't sort of implemented that. But okay, so just going back to your article, I like the bit where you said there's a kind of a reset in corporate governance and risk management. That was quite an interesting thing. And obviously you guys advocate for mutable business sort of approach quite a lot. Designed as a kind of, with change in mind, designed with change in mind, right? So get a little bit more about that. What's kind of your view on those things that you said?
Again, at the moment, risk management and this whole sort of governance of risk within an organization is something that you sort of look at periodically. And then it's very much it's a sort of tick box. It's become a tick box exercise. Have we got, do we know what the risks are? Do we know how likely it is to happen? What's the impact of them? What are the mitigations? And then you suddenly find that, it's easy to do the easy mitigations, and they tend to be for the things that are not that critical. The ones that are, they don't happen very often, but my God, when they do, it's critical, tend to be quite complex and expensive in terms of ensuring that because you're doing something in the likelihood that it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And back to my argument, I think I put in there that none of us like, buying insurance, because every year you get to the end of your insurance, you have to redo your insurance, and nothing happened the year before. You think, oh God, have I got to spend money on that again? And so this whole issue, the governance piece, has almost got to that point where it's going, well, it's never happened. It's not likely to happen. And they forget but when it does, you're out of business routine. They forget that how. So the reset needs to be, don't just focus on how often it's going to happen. You absolutely need to understand how critical that is to your business and how quickly you would go out of business. It may only happen once in a lifetime. Are we going to see another CrowdStrike one like that? Well, not completely like that, I should think. If there was, the CrowdStrike people would probably go out of business. But it's that sort of reset, because I think too many risk registers in organizations have become tick box exercises. Oh yes, and you can say, oh, we're doing all these mitigations, and when you look at the what they're doing is they're ticking off the easy ones. We improved 30 things last month or last quarter or wherever, however often they review it. And we make sure that this doesn't happen. And you look back and think, well, they're all the ones that were easy to do, where where it happens quite regularly, and the implication is very, very, very little. You think, why did you even bother doing the mitigations? Because actually recovering from them is so bloody easy. Excuse my French.
And also, I think, I like the bit that you said about focusing on outcome, not output. Having an outcome sort of approach, not an output-based approach to things as well.
Yeah, it again, too many things are stats are based on how many things you've done rather than what outcomes you get. And I'm sure we'll come on to that in our next pieces.
We definitely will. Excellent. Okay, so so that was CrowdStrike. And I think just one last point, I think, from me is that because our sort of Western economy and society in general is kind of, got a lot more globalist, if you like, anything small somewhere is affecting a lot of other things. And I don't mean just from a technical point of view, but just from, people trying to, get on their plane to go on their holiday type of thing. It affects much more people, these sorts of things, than it used to do in the past. In the past, if British Airways went down in the 80s, it was just British Airways that went down in the 80s. But now, potentially you could have this type of thing that addresses multiple, systems of multiple organizations could easily take them all down. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support me. You may also want to check out some of the other videos on this channel. Bye for now.